Hello everyone. Welcome to the first session of the new center seminar, Psychotic Acceleration by our instructor, Max Valenčič. I'll read out the description of the seminar. Accelerationist philosophy still lacks a proper grounding and systemization of its key concepts such as the outside, intensification, and acceleration itself. The project of psychotic acceleration contends that this grounding can be achieved by synthesizing Lacanian psychoanalysis with Nicholas' accelerationist thought. Its central claim is that the register of psychosis is the register of acceleration. In other words, the psychotic register, one of the three possible positions the subject can occupy in relation to the other, provides the structure within which key accelerationist concepts can be explicated and the accelerationist sensibility fully understood. In this synthesis of Nicholas' accelerationism and Lacanian theory, the seminar first spells out the distinctive logic of psychotic experience, the structural marker that sets it apart from the neurotic and perverse formations. It then draws out the specific implications this difference carries for the accelerationist project. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, a psychotic structure results when the name of the father, the signifier that normally anchors the subject's link to the symbolic other, is foreclosed rather than repressed. This foreclosure blocks the subject's entry into symbolic order of language, law, and shared meaning, and allows the excluded signifier to return in the real as hallucination or delusion. Acceleration philosophy in this context starts from this exclusion. The other has been foreclosed and now occupies the enigmatic position of the outside. The seminar explores the conceptual, epistemological, and ontological consequences that stem from this displacement, focusing on psychotic phenomenology and epistemology. Because of the foreclosure, the relation to the other no longer falls under the dialectic logic that would stabilize it. Instead, it undergoes constant intensification. For this reason, the experience and understanding of the other in psychosis are fundamentally different, giving rise to a distinctive conceptual logic, which is the logic of acceleration. About Max Valenčič. Max Valenčič is a theorist, writer, and editor. His philosophical project, Accelerationism, tends to formalize accelerationist theory within the psychotic register, which he understands as an engine of acceleration. He is also a researcher at the New Center for Research and Practice, an editor of some journal for contemporary art and theory fiction, and the host of the Technologos podcast. His writing is available on his Substack, Psychotic Savior, where he charts the implications of contemporary subjectivity through a psychotic lens. Max, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for this nice introduction, and thanks again for the New Center for giving me this opportunity. I'm super happy to have this chance to present my project to you and to have this discussion with you. And I presume you see the slide, so this is a reappropriation of the quote by Land, of course, but it has some extra implications when we look it through the psychotic lens. But it's important to say what the goal of this seminar is and what I'm trying to achieve with my project.
Max, your the slide is not. Can you share it again?
Here, now it should work, right? Now you see the slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So, so what is the goal of this seminar? What I'm trying to achieve with this project? It's because there are still some misrecognition of what the idea behind the project is, and to dispel one of them right away, this won't be a psychoanalysis of Nick Land. That would be like the lame take of being interested in psychosis, and also like what Land achieved philosophically. His version of accelerationism is what we'll take a closer look at. And another thing that should be stressed is how we use psychosis. Again, we aren't interested in madness per se, or a simple loss of reality, as this is the case how psychosis is usually understood, as this manifest psychosis where reality gets disintegrated or loses grounds or whatever you want to call it. But this is, again, like not the main focus of the seminar. We aren't treating psychosis in this way, but we are interested in something different. And then something different is this distinct structure of subjectivity. And this distinct structure of subjectivity is nicely spelled out in Lacanian psychoanalysis, because in Lacanian psychoanalysis we have three potential structures that ground our subjectivity: neurosis, psychosis, perversion. One of them is characterized by repression. The other, psychosis, that interests us the most is foreclosure. And the third is disavowal, perversion. But we won't focus on perversion in this seminar because basically the psychotic structure and psychotic subjectivity is almost an antithesis to neurosis. And this main thing that happens, foreclosure, rejection of the name of the father, this structural operator that defines repression, castration, and so on, is precisely what psychotics reject. And that's why we will be interested in this particular aspect. And yeah, that's about it for now. Yeah. So again, psychosis, like understood generally, is just one potential relationship to a reality, nothing more, nothing less. And the goal of this seminar is not only to introduce this particular relationship, what are its peculiarities, how the relationship with the other is structured, enjoyment, jouissance, and so on, but also to inhabit this structure as much as we can and to extract as much meaningful information from it. Because this is the goal of this seminar, to try to see how things appear if we take these considerations or preconditions seriously. And that's why we shouldn't pathologize psychotic structure. We shouldn't think of it only clinically, or we should be very open-minded in how we try to understand it, because otherwise we lose a lot of what's important in it. And yes, I think I already said, because this will all be explained much more precisely further on. And so, because of course there's this tension between, not necessarily tension, but people can feel like that, why am I interested in Lacanian psychoanalysis if Deleuze and Guattari have already done most of the work? So I share the sentiment, but I think that it's easier to define the key differences and show exactly where the key problems lie, or what the playing field actually is within Lacanian psychoanalysis, because everything is outlined so neatly and transparently. That's why I chose to focus on Lacanian psychoanalysis, what Lacan specifically has to say about psychosis throughout the years, and also what contemporary Lacanian theorists have to say about it nowadays. And again, I really like this motto by Deleuze and Guattari from Anti-Oedipus, where they write that the little joy lies in schizophrenia as a process, not in the schizo as a clinical entity. And the same is true in my approach to psychosis. Again, we are interested in the clinical entity, because if we are interested in clinical entity and only in the breakdown of the loss of reality, of the damaged relationship with language and so on, we immediately treat psychosis as a position that isn't sustainable by itself, a kind of impossibility, something that gives us an insight into some key properties, into how reality gets structured, but still only as a reminder of what doesn't take place or what isn't properly installed or whatever. So we have to go beyond this approach if we want to extract the full implications of what psychotic structure is. Yeah, and that's why I use this term that we should subjectify the psychotic structure, because only in this way we can find its full potential or full potentiality. And because otherwise the implications aren't fully explored, and the radicality of how psychotics in their multiple creative ways manage their relationship with reality, other social bond, jouissance, can get lost. And also in Lacanian circles, we have this repetitive emphasis on like a couple of key figures, like Schreber, Judge Schreber, who is the most famous psychotic, probably, and his memoirs of my nervous illness has been first studied deeply by Freud and then by Lacan, and then contemporary interpretations follow this suit. So maybe we can find an even better context to push psychosis further, and that's why I think that this merger between accelerationism, or specifically Nick Land's version of it, and psychosis is maybe this missing operator from which we can extract some really important points. Yes, and yeah, because Landian project, of course, accelerationist philosophy in general, it's what I said in this pitch for the seminar. It's speed without constraints, living without limits, nothing is prohibited, and so forth. So accelerationism is this attempt at not constraining our relationship with reality of what's possible, what's out there, what is pulling our strings, let's say in the CCRU language. So I think that this perfectly captures the psychotic experience, but much more rigorously, systematically grounded in reality. And precisely because it's grounded in reality, because it understands that there are some constraints that have to be accepted, but not simply as an act of faith, but because reality necessitates them to be accepted, that we have a much different appreciation of what potentially this psychotic trajectory is. Because in Landian accelerationism, we have this reversal where not only is the psychotic position the most rigorous, because it doesn't subscribe to any preconceived notion of what is true, good, just, what reality is, what the other is, and so on. That's the role of the outside as this selection operator, but also because it doesn't set limits on what is possible, how things can be understood, it has to find a rigor that enables one to endure this this approach, this kind of philosophizing, performative interaction with reality without collapsing. So this is where the rigor comes from, and why accelerationism is this much needed antidote that doesn't take psychosis as something that has already collapsed, but finds in the psychotic project something firm, rigorous, grounded in reality. So this is why the importance of especially Lacanian project is clearly there. Yes. Yes, I think that, and maybe just the last point, and that's why I think that what my project is doing is potentially important, because you won't find this in classic Lacanian literature. Like, even when I try to do my own research, still there's not many papers or books that you could simply read and where the stakes of what, for example, Accelerationist project is pointing at are directly answered by Lacanian psychoanalysts, because their interaction with this problem is much different, and how they approach psychosis and what they are interested in and so forth. So this accelerationist vantage point is, from my perspective, a privileged position, and that's why it becomes an important philosophical research project by itself. And the only way to answer these questions of the full implications of psychosis is, in my perspective, through or within accelerationist philosophy, because this is the place where the psychotic project gets fully explored, outlined, accelerated, like the full logical conclusion of what it's pointing at is, in a sense, revealed. And is this revealing that is, of course, like very distinct for Lacanian philosophy, but also for how one can even speak of what actually the problem is, the stakes are, and so forth. Because if this is not clearly understood, then we can just like it's if you're not part of the process, you won't be able to understand it fully, and then you will arbitrarily constrain it and so forth. It's like, I mean, this is a silly example, but it's like theorizing about psychedelics without never taking them. Like, you won't be Terence McKenna, you will be like a mediocre theorist. I'm not saying that Lacanian psychoanalysts are mediocre theorists, but they are not pushing the full implications, or what's been revealed by Land is still something that they don't fully consider or take into account. Maybe this is the most general statement I can give at this point. And maybe like a short summary of the 4 sessions. In this session, we'll try to set the groundwork for the Psychotic Accelerationism project, to explore the key concepts, introduce the primordial scene of the project, how how to visualize, diagrammatize it, and so forth, so that the stakes of the project are revealed, and to understand why this is there, why foreclosure is so important of a concept, and so forth. So the second session will then maybe like retrace one step back and start again with foreclosure, but more specifically with the fact that because of foreclosure, because the name of the father, the structural operator that determines our relationship with the other and how the other is managed, because this doesn't take place, then the psychotic reality, this generative interface, let's say, it's not defined, it's not structured. There are multiplicity of structural determinations without any of them really taking place. And how, through this perspective, we can have like a much more direct insight into how reality is being construed or generated. And psychosis is like, again, like almost like a privileged position to see how this takes place. But because in psychosis, there's no limit, no structural operator is defined, like reality is not like established, determined, localized. We have psychotics can explore a broader sense, a broader space of how reality gets generated, and this is related to either being integrated or not. Well, these terms will get clearer soon, but I can't explain everything from the start. But this it will make sense more, like how this is related to either being integrated or not, to empathy, precognition, and potentially other coming from the future, which is something that, let's say, Land is really famous for. So our project should make sense of why techno-capital is coming from the future. Like this should be explained, if this is indeed the space where the question of why in accelerationism can be tackled like explicitly or transparently. Then third session will explore this subjectifying of the medium more extensively. It's an attempt to subjectivize psychotic structure, as I was kind of rambling on a little bit earlier, and to see its full implications. And I don't want to spoil anything in advance, but maybe just to say that this subjectifying the medium is a phrase by Boris Groys in his paper. That's where I found this expression that I found very valuable in how to understand this relationship with the other that isn't defined, but it is there, that has to be like managed, controlled, understood in psychosis. And this subjectifying the medium is an attempt to do just that. But also I saw that, for example, Patrick Leftwick on their blog, they were also like writing about subjectification of the medium in an interesting way. But Boris Groys was the first influence for me. And again, subjectivation of the medium, like each subjectivation, it's also an intensification. So this is like another part of the accelerationist philosophy and the story that we are interested in. This is another part that has to be explored. What is this intensification? And like Miroslav Griško, my colleague, has been the most instrumental for me to understand this point. But accelerationist philosophy is simply this intensification of the how, like, yeah, I don't want to spoil everything in advance, but this intensification is clearly seen like in these transitions from techno-capital, okay, one determination. It's already science fiction, but it's not enough. Like we have to have another determination. Okay, maybe techno-capital as AI. Okay, yeah, it's more speculative. Hits even better, but no, maybe it's not enough. Maybe we have to have techno-capital as AGI from the future. Maybe only this is the right determination of what we are facing, what's on the other side. So we see how Landian philosophy operates, and each determination is further intensification of these relationships. This will be a really important point that will be explored today as well. And the fourth session, maybe like for some most controversial, but also very important because it will be an attempt to understand Landian political project and why he has certain affinities, why he is affiliated with the right-wing projects, I don't know, neo-reaction, like how this is reflected in his preference for, I don't know, reality being managed by things that produce like spontaneous order, being mediated by the invisible hand of the market, so no determination, no transcendent authority, how this is connected to Anglo's providential destiny. For example, what Land has been writing recently in his compact articles, and so forth, and we'll see that at a conceptual level, it's the same story if you understand what level is doing, what Land is doing philosophically, you know why he has this affinities politically. It's like quite a simple translation. Once you take everything into account, there's no mystery. And this can be nicely explored in Land's theoretization of good and bad diagonals as two ways for like gaining extra access or traction upon reality, but bad diagonal is where this necessitates a further integration, whereas good diagonal is where this is the opposite, where frontier gets even further opened and this outsideness is even more revealed or becomes an even greater selective pressure. But this will be clear in the fourth session. And yeah, maybe just to like just a final point that, of course, like maybe some people will say, oh, why are you focusing on foreclosure? This is Lacan Seminar 3, like the concept of psychosis has been revised multiple times, most notably in the seminar on Joyce, the symptom, the 23rd seminar, and not only that, but now we have concepts like ordinary psychosis by Jacques-Alain Miller that even further like problematize this firm distinction between neurosis and psychosis that was in place in the third seminar. And this is also related to how Lacanian project develops, like more like middle Lacan focus on the signifiers, the symbolic, and then more and more on the body, the real, and topology substitutes language as the privileged site for understanding the unconscious and so forth. So there's a lot of conceptual work being done through the years, but still foreclosure is a really important concept, and symptom and other concepts can be nicely introduced in the story that we will be developing here in this seminar. Yes, and I didn't mention that. Yeah, maybe we can have like we can take like space for the discussion after I finish the section on neurosis, or we'll see how long it will take, but then we can discuss, and then we will, after the discussion, we will finish with the section on psychosis, because yeah, we should take a break. So yeah, what is foreclosure? This is, you saw that in the syllabus, you have this presentation by Alireza Taheri, Iranian psychoanalyst, for the foreign object. And there he sets the stakes quite nicely, and introduces the difference between neurosis and psychosis in the clearest way possible. So yeah, let's introduce the story, how he puts it. So the other, like at the start, is not defined. It's there. It addresses the child, but the address, it's not like fully understood, signified. The child, first act is that they imagine they are someone for the other. First other is the mother, and usually like we conceptualize this as trying to be the object of mother's desire. But this is just how the child tries to get a grip on this relationship to make sense of it, because otherwise the other is invasive, foreign, demanding, and there has to be some regulation with the other. Otherwise, reality is not stabilized. There's no mediation. The real gets too close, and so on. Body gets fragmented, and so on. And like, because the other mother at the start, if we take this story within the interpersonal dynamic within the family, comes and goes. Her desire is not signified. This is what this relationship between absence and presence is. Sometimes she is there for the child, sometimes not. And the child has no way to understand why she is there and sometimes not. And that's why the desire of the other is enigmatic. It's perplexing, it confuses the child, it's not signified, and the child cannot make sense of it. And then the father intervenes into this relationship. That's what interdiction of the father means. It separates the child from the mother. It transforms this invasive presence that is not signified into something that is. And this is done by the father, biological father, but actually symbolic father, naming what the desire of the mother is. So a substitution takes place. This is like at the time when Lacan was like interested in linguistics and Jacobson's linguistics, specifically the difference between metonym and metaphor. But metaphor is how substitution, like name of the father, desire of the mother, gets substitutes by the name of the father. So name of the father determines what the other's desire is, what the mother desires, and what the child has to be, because the child cannot fully satisfy mother's desire, so they have to let go of this impossibility and then enter into the social bond, and through it reconstruct this relationship with the other, reconfigure their psyche, and then by giving something, by losing something, gaining something in return, like meaningful social relations. Yeah, maybe that's enough said. And this is how like the child gets introduced into language, and social reality is instituted, and so forth. This impossibility is transformed by being something in social bond and having an access to it. Yeah, and so if this substitution is accepted, this child psyche gets reconfigured, and this is what constitutes neurotic subjectivity. This is this repression, like you cannot be the object of mother desire, you have to relinquish this possibility, letting go. And if you let go, if there's a leap of faith, if the father's intervention is understood as an act of love and not simply demand, then the child can get something in return. They can become like a subject within the symbolic order, can have meaningful relations, healthy sexuality, and so on, protection from the social bond, from the demanding other. They can limit authority in return. Everything is paid by relinquishing this impossibility. This is the trade-off of neurotic subjectivity, and this is the reason why, like in each neurotic story, this is deemed as the most important step that the child has to take, because otherwise a myriad of problems re-emerge. But there, of course, is separation from the mother and alienation in language, like the loss of this direct connection. So now the child can access this lost satisfaction only through the social bond, through language, through the signifiers, and this is how alienation, this loss of this direct connection with the other is instituted, but also like the other, precisely because there's a loss, there's a negation, and so this relation is like now mediated in a more functional way. And in foreclosure, yeah, the opposite is the case. Name of the father is foreclosed. Interdiction of the symbolic father is not justifiable. This determination of this relationship. So this like what child has to give and what gains in return, this is not justifiable for the psychotic subject, because the subject has to accept the alienation into language, the symbolic other, the social bond, and only through it now they can access this relationship that they have prior to it established with the other. But this relationship that they have established prior to the interdiction of the father is forever lost. So this is what psychotics cannot relinquish or aren't willing to give up. And so the name of the father sets limits, determines what's possible of or not. Name of the father is both know and name. This is Lacan's playing of this French word for father is both know and name. And through it, subject becomes a part of culture, tradition, established social roles. And that's why we say that language precedes the subject, or that we are born into language, because like language defines us in advance, like even from the start when parents give us our name and so forth. And but yeah, like psychotics are the ones that feel that they can manage their relationship with the other on their own terms. That's why the interdiction of the name of the father and the introduction of this structural operator, the name of the father, that limits and defines the relationship with the other, is not justifiable, and that this is just an arbitrary imposition that can be done in different ways, and that this imposition is not like a necessity, but an arbitrary convention, nothing more, nothing less, and that the ideals of the social bond, justice, social relations, these are just fictions that constrain the possibilities that are there but aren't explored, because like everyone subscribes to this limiting operator. And this term psychotic savoir is taken from Brett Filmiani, US psychoanalyst in the Bay Area, I believe. And the first chapter and second of his book, Psychosis and Extreme States, is also in the syllabus. This is the key, maybe. Psychotics have their own relationship with the other, which they aren't willing to give up. Because if name of the father is embraced and affirmed, then this relationship is lost, gone forever. Because establishing, like, subscribing to the name of the father is precisely subscribing to the fact that this relationship has to be severed, lost, because it's an impossibility that has to be overcome, what I already said. And that's why this relationship, that like psychotic relationship with the other, is structurally forbidden from the start. That's basically like neurotic subjectivity is constituted by forbidding psychotic relationship with the other. That's maybe like a direct implication, and repression, affirmation of existence is basically how this psychotic relationship with the other, this direct relationship with the other, is lost. And I already repeated some of these points, but again, the rationale for why this has to take place, it's always the same, because it's too intense, socially dysfunctional, like prohibition of incest, destructive, there's no limits, so on. The society cannot function in this way, like authority has to be checked, limited, otherwise, like we have like Taheri uses a principle, an example of a gangster, like everyone wants to be a gangster, or I don't know, Donald Trump. But psychotics have this firm belief that this doesn't have to be the case, and their whole project of existence is showing that this doesn't have to be the case, that what they subscribe to, what they felt, that what they felt is a possibility that becomes their kind of life project, and that's how they try to reconfigure their relationship with their damaged relationship with language, social bonds, others, and so forth. So there's this giant reconstruction of reality that has to happen. And some of them do it in a more healthy way than others. Like, there are a lot of dangers in this reconstruction. The power of delusion can take hold because nothing is limiting the other. So in psychosis, it can happen that other takes hold of the subject and subject loses control. Because of it, there are multiple dangerous pathways that a psychotic has to be aware of if the neurotic isn't proven right. So, and another important part of this story provided by Taheri is that affirmation of existence, repression, losing this direct connection with the other is a leap of faith. There's no, like, the child doesn't know anything about why, like, the child doesn't understand why this has to take place. They have no knowledge of, like, why our society wouldn't be able to operate if this weren't the case. So a leap of faith has to take place, and this leap of faith is belief in authority, that authority is justifiable, that isn't simply corrupt or not. And this is how reality gets, again, reconfigured. But it's important for us and for Psychotic Accelerationist project because of this leap of faith, neurotics are born in a reality that isn't their own. That's why they lose access to reality. They lose this access to the generative interface with the other, because they become a part of the social bond precisely by, like, taking this leap of faith and being reborn in a system where the existence is already defined. So this is why, like, psychotic existence, it's much less generative, much less creative, at least in some sense, than psychotics, because they are born into reality that is already there. Whereas psychotics have to establish their own reality because no reality exists for them. That is the key difference. And yeah, that's why I use this concept of desire to stay in the dream world in psychosis, because yeah, they aren't willing to let go of their reality, but because nothing nothing is like there's no guarantee for their reality. These are only dreams, and their existence is as if, like, nothing guarantees their existence, whereas neurotic existence is guaranteed by the social bond. That's precisely the trade-off for why neurotics make this leap for, like, possibility of a stable existence and so forth, that they can be kind of recognized, like protected and so forth, and everything that comes with it. And because existence is not affirmed, because of foreclosure, there's this problem of signification. Psychotics aren't, like, given a specific social, like they don't have any defined social or role. They aren't signified. They're beyond signification. They're at the level of the real. Their existence is of existence. They only partially exist. And because of that, there's this real danger of, like, paranoia, being overwhelmed by the presence of the other, because, like, nothing limits this presence, because there's no protective shield, no stable roles that would, like, define the parameters of engagement one can have with them, and so forth. Like, there's no protection in this kind of existence. And because there's no protection, no definition, no role assigned to them when they are asked, or when the questions of existence come about. This is pointed by Steen Venhole. I don't know how to pronounce his name, unfortunately. I haven't checked, but it's again on the reading list. When these questions arise, destabilization can take place because there's nothing there. The questions of existence haven't been resolved. Who am I? What do I want to become? Who am I to the other? All of these existential questions aren't resolved. Yeah, but still, like, whenever this story is told, we have to take into account that it's provided by a neurotic. Not that, like, I'm all conspiratorial or whatever, but there's always a problem of translation, of emphasis, like what's first, what's second, what's really important, what's not, what are actual possibilities, what are not. This is again the LSD example. Maybe there's something additional to the story, or something more to be said that isn't fully taken into account there, and maybe the clinical setting is not the most important one when we are talking about these problems, when we are trying to define these key questions and so forth. And again, like, there's this irony that I already alluded to, that because neurotic subjectivity necessitates the exclusion of psychotic existence, then when psychotics aren't able to exist, neurotics theorize how psychotic existence is the impossibility, fool's gold, even though neurotic existence necessitates the inexistence of the psychotic existence. So you see why this might be a difficulty that has to be solved maybe in a different way. And as soon as this relationship is abstracted from the interpersonal family dynamics of family dynamics, and it is rethought in terms of language, the alienation that comes with the signifier, speaking being, and then later on in the noting phase in late Lacan, when topology takes the primacy over the signifier, and it's not lack but whole, that the whole has to be established. Then this simplistic accusation that psychotics simply want to be an object of the desire of the mother isn't really that valid, or like it's so abstracted that it's not like psychotics are just like people who don't know that this is like a weird connection to have. Yes. Yeah, I'm just thinking if maybe we should take a break here, or maybe we can push through. But let's continue this story and abstract it to its most radical, let's say. And I believe that this I will like you don't have to read what's in the slides. Maybe just focus on this blue area because this is the important part. But this diagram is from Chris Field's Physics as Information Processing, and this is maybe like how this relationship with the other in psychosis can be like structurally defined, like how this relationship with the other takes place. And I find this formalism quite insightful and important for like defining the psychotic's relationship with the enigmatic other, the other that's not defined because the name of the father isn't operative for them for closure, and how this relationship takes place. And so this is my redrawing of the same diagram, just like for greater consistency with other diagrams, and maybe it's like easier to see what is going on in this way. So here are just some definitions, like language is this, because like maybe just to start, like just to say, like relationship with the other has to be defined, because only in that way like an existence become manageable, like reality is stabilized, enjoyment is possible, and so on. So like stable relationship with reality is there. And if there's no stability, there's this subjective destitution that is usually associated with psychosis. But how this interface, this blue area, is defined, this is the difference between neurosis and psychosis, because what is this blue area? This is the encoding surface in increased fields, where the exchange of information between, in this case, Alice and Bob, two systems, let's say A and B, I know, subject and other, takes place. And the only thing that they know of about the other is what's being encoded on this blue surface. So there's no understanding like what the other is, what's behind this boundary, that's this encoding surface, this interface, but only what's being encoded on it. And through this encoding, the relationship gets stabilized, aligned, and yeah, that's about it. And there are two potential ways for how this stabilization can take place. The interface is necessary, but how this interface is defined and how the relationship with the other is reconstructed is the key difference between neurosis and psychosis, because in neurosis, the name of the father is the structural operator that limits this interface. It determines what kind of relationship we can have with the other, and through this determination, it stabilizes it. So it makes it functional precisely because like what's on the other side is like firmly defined, it's limited, protocolized, nicely channeled. So the interaction with it is secured. Like if you subscribe to these principles, if you like interact in such a way, there can be stability in reality. Whereas with foreclosure, the interface it's not defined, and because the interface is not defined, but still it has to be the interface still has to be there. If there's no interface, then the other becomes the invasive force that causes destabilization. This what Lacanians say, like return of the name of the father in the real, what has been rejected in the symbolic returns in the real. So what psychotics have to do is find on their own a singular inscription of the other, and this singular inscription of the other is the stabilizing interface. And this stabilizing interface, it's what's called the symptom. But this is the key difference, that in psychosis, the relationship with the other is not defined, whereas in neurosis, the relationship with the other is defined. So in psychosis, when this relationship with the other is established, nothing limits this relationship or overdetermines it in advance, because in neurosis, stability is gained by overdetermination, by prior definition of what kind of relationship one can have with the other, whereas in psychosis, this determination doesn't take place. Maybe this will become clearer when we proceed, but this is the key point, like how a relationship is established, if a prior determination of the relationship is possible or not. And I already set these points, and this is like a brutally simple diagram, but with the other is structurally defined. And name of the father determines the kind of relationship we can have with the other, as I already said. And therefore constrains the relationship with it, prohibits it, defines it, limits it. And through this structural determination, it defines the relationship and signifies the other, what's on the other side. Because of this determination, the other is integrated and is now internally managed. that's the key thing, that the other is not now some foreign presence, enigmatic other outside of the blanket that isn't defined and that one cannot know what it is, can only find a stable relationship with it, but is through this structural overdetermination reinscribed and internally managed. So this is why now the other is not outside, and this outside has to be understood, managed, written, but is inside. It's dialectically integrated. It's internally managed because the relationship to the other is always mediated by the social bond. So whenever you want to access the other, you have to go through the name of the father, through this limiting operator. And that's why what's outside is inscribed inside, because this path to the other, it is structurally determined and therefore structurally managed. So even if the outside is still outside, it cannot be like fully known, like we saw this interface, it's signified in neurosis through this structural operator, and therefore it's as if it's internal and it's internally managed. Yeah, and this is like what I was talking already, but maybe I can just recap it again. And the loss that comes with repression, castration, and embrace of name of the father is a part of this trade-off of losing direct relationship with the other, what's on the other side. Like you cannot simply try to determine this relationship on your own, like what's on the other side, what's this thing that has to be managed, that's communicating, that isn't stabilized but has to be stabilized, but it's always already reinscribed, and then you just access this through already established channel. And yeah. And that's why I say that the other is lost, because it cannot be accessed directly anymore. The relationship is set in advance, the interface constrains and defines it, and the only access to the other is through name of the father. That's why the loss is constitutive of neurosis, because there's no access to the other anymore, no direct access to the other. This access has been precluded or lost, and now the other can be accessed only through this like this limiting function that is name of the father. And yeah, and that's why like this signification of the mother's desire, the other, and yeah, and that's why this signification of the mother desire is basically like how the other is channeled, how it will be experienced, enjoyed, understood. So everything that isn't fully like inscribed or like determined by the signifier, what's beyond inscription is now like yeah, maybe this point will come later on more nicely. So yeah, and this is then an alternative diagram, again brutally simplistic, but in psychosis. So in contrary to dialectics, we have foreclosure where all communication is externalized. All communication is like this. It's only through this boundary. Like there's no, the other remains foreign. So all communication is externalized, and the other is not, like, it's not defined, it's not structurally limited, and so forth. So again, neurosis is overdetermination of this relationship, management of what's external, the other internally. The other is perceived as and this is the key thing that happens with this signification of the other, that other is now not perceived as something external and therefore like unknown, something that isn't already understood, defined, but internally something that is dialectically managed. So this is the key difference, that in psychosis, the other is experienced as foreign, as something that doesn't have a face, doesn't have a definition, that doesn't have an already given inscription, whereas in neurosis, the other is already determined, already managed, already veiled. That's the key, and basically that's the key difference, and that's why I say that psychosis is managing the relationship with the other without defining it in advance, so without signifying it, integrating it, and dialectically managing it. And this is done through a symptom. And symptom is an attempt to establish a functioning relationship with the other without defining it. So this is the key. The other remains outside, enigmatic, foreign, but it's still controlled, written, manageable. Whereas in neurosis, the only way the other is manageable, is by defining it in advance. And because and this necessitates that the other is not anymore something external, but has to become internal. And not only that, it has to be dialectically managed. So everything that was before happening on the outside, something that is communicating with us, trying to establish relation, but doesn't have a face, now has a face, is inscribed in already established relationship and mediated through the name of the father, through this limiting operator that determines how the other can be experienced. And this is this veiling of the other. This is this misrecognition, what the other wants from me. This is how, like, this is why in neurosis, everything that isn't signified is veiled. And this veiling is how what goes beyond this inscription remains within it. This dialectical management of this inscription. I will give nice examples shortly, but this is the key difference, that again, just to make it clear, what kind of trade-off is psychosis? Connection with the other is not lost, but because it's not, I said enough. Let's move on. Maybe this is probably what I already said, but this is like the key difference. In neurosis, the other is managed by being inscribed, integrated. That's the key difference. Like, what's outside is being integrated, internally managed. So no outside. Whatever happens, like whatever happens, like new invention, new problems, new discoveries, novelty, all of that is immediately reinscribed within the social bond and veiled, internally managed. That's why the outside is lost. Why there's such a beef between psychosis and neurosis, and why, like, these are two fundamentally different notions of how one relates with the other language outside. But there's this and there's this reversal, an interesting reversal that happens, that in psychosis, the other has to first be understood by trying to know what's on the other side, what's communicating it to us, what's determining this relationship, what kind of relationship this is. Because the other is not determined, it has to be determined. That's the key. But this determination is determination of what is outside. So there's no knowledge of what's outside, what's enigmatic, what's on the other side, what's communicating it, and through trying to understand it, trying to decode what's communicating it with us, what is like, what we have to like make manageable, like what we have to encode so the relationship gets stabilized, is what psychosis is. But importantly, yeah, this is the key. This is not a definition, as the other is still fundamentally foreign. So definition would be only if the other was structurally overdetermined in advance. So attempt to understand it is not to define it. That's the key, because in neurosis, to get a stabilized relationship, we have to define the other. Whereas in neurosis, to stabilize one relationship is to understand it is simply to stabilize one relationship with it. It's not define it. That's why in psychosis, the relationship with the other is not constrained. It's not limited. It's not mediated by this protective shield. Like symptom is symptom is the relationship with the other that doesn't suffer from this alienation. But this will be explained further on. Yeah, and that's why in psychosis, the other is not integrated, not inscribed, not dialectically managed. And this is the key difference. And yeah, maybe should we take a break now, because we are I think I'm talking more than an hour, so maybe like it's time to refresh our thoughts, or maybe before a break we can take some questions, whatever you prefer. Yeah, maybe then I think it's best if we take a 10-minute break and then move on, and you will see the story is evolving. Okay. Should we start?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Yeah, maybe just to reiterate this point, because I feel like that this hasn't been clear, or that this diagram introduced maybe some confusion, but it's basically super simple. Maybe this diagram like is it's too like yeah, it's just that like that when we are this relationship with the other, like when we are managing this relationship with the other has to be managed. So inscription has to take place. This is true for neurosis and psychosis. Like inscription is necessary. This is the way like relationship is functional. If there's no inscription, there is no boundary, no distinction between one system and the other. That's why collapse happens if there's no inscription. But how this inscription is managed is what defines neurosis and psychosis, the difference between them as two types of managing these inscription. And neurosis is that this inscription is done by limiting the relationship we have with the other. Whereas psychosis is inscription without this limitation. So this is the key difference, like stabilization gained by limiting the other, whereas stabilization like hopefully gained without limiting the other. And this limitation is simply how much of the other are you willing to take in. Neurosis limits the other, and that's how like it constrains it, makes it functional, everything that we already said. Whereas psychosis, because like this limitation is precisely what's been rejected, this limitation, i.e. name of the father, it's an attempt to establish a relationship with the other without limitation. It's basically very simple. And that's why I use this boundary, this stabilizing interface, because it gives us an insight into how in psychosis there's an attempt to establish a working interface without defining the other, because defining the other is how the other gets constrained, because definition is limitation. Whereas in psychosis, the other is not defined, it's enigmatic. So there is no preconceived notion of what's on the other side, what's this relationship, how it's managed. And psychosis is an attempt to establish a relationship without any of this preconceived notion. That's the radicality of psychosis. But all of the problems and dangers are a direct product of this fact. Hopefully this is now clear, and that's why this formalism that we cannot know what's on the other side, we can only know what's encoded on the boundary through this information exchange is hopefully, at least maybe like if you have more time and like then it starts to operate hopefully. And yeah, this is and then like as we already said, dialectical integration and internalization of the other is how the other gets limited. This is the limiting. This is the limiting, that the relationship is defined and mediated. So like it's like a compromise, like you cannot do fully something, okay, you can do that, but you cannot do this. Okay, yeah, this is possible, but then we can take care of this. It's like there's no chance of something like just emerging and completely overflowing whatever exists, because integration of the other, dialectical mediation. Okay, so sorry for this. Sorry for repeating myself so much. And then like neurosis. Then now like sorry that it's so conceptual, but it's hard to hard to not set the stakes properly, because what is object A? Object A is a product of this inscription. So other is the other is inscribed, but object A is this missing remainder of this inscription. It's how it gives us an insight into how the other is managed, because object A is not only because inscription of the other object A is an insight into how this inscription of the other gets managed, because the other cannot be like fully controlled, fully written, fully integrated. If this was the case, there would be no other. But object A is an insight into how this control interface, this overdetermination by the name of the father, operates. So it gives us an insight into how the other is managed, and that's why object A is the place of is the place that veils this missing remainder that isn't signified by this inscription of what the other is, because that's how this relationship is like managed in a controlled way. And it managed in a controlled way because, as we said, the other it's still outside, but because in neurosis the other is dialectically integrated and internally managed, this outside is only glimpsed through the object A. That's the key. And so if in psychosis this real remainder of signification is precisely the place where the enigmatic other from the outside is speaking to us, and that this is where this relationship has to be managed around stabilizing it around this real kernel that isn't that has to be stabilized, otherwise it's invasive, like destructible, coming from the real and everything like that. In neurosis, it's different. This object A is not experienced as something that's coming from the outside, but internally. And this outside is then not only internally managed, but internally experienced. And this internal experience, it's how the outside is like reinscribed internally, dialectically managed and veiled through fantasy, desire, and ideology. And that's what we see in neurotic questions of what the other wants from me, who am I from them. All of this drama of desire is a product of this dialectical inscription of the other, but then what's been lost, this outside other, this enigmatic outside other that is now managed internally, is only glimpsed through this missing remainder. This A, object A, this unsignifiable part, these bits of the real, these bits of the outside that returns in bits and pieces as unsignifiable remainder of this structural determination. And this remainder is the cause of desire for neurosis. That's the key thing, because what's not signifiable would in psychosis be experienced as coming from the outside, enigmatic, foreign, like outside, not determined, something that isn't us fully. Whereas in neurosis, because the outside is constrained, limited, then what is not us is experienced as these missing remainders that are like distributed through the social bond and through which and which are mediated by fantasy, ideology, desire. And this is why like the outside is internally inscribed precisely in such a way that this remainder becomes the cause of desire for neurosis. I'm interested in what's not me, but this what's not me is not the outside, but it's like something like how I don't know, like what I don't fully understand, but would like to understand, and what I don't have, another person has, or like what I don't have access to. So all of these dynamic of what isn't signifiable, what's coming from the outside, is now managed and internally distributed through these missing remainders. And this is why that's why like desire is transformed into lack, and lack is what's enjoyed, this missing remainder. Yeah. Again, just to make it clear, in neurosis, outside is fully inscribed in the social bond. That's why it's lost. The remainder of this inscription is object A, and this remainder, something that doesn't fit, that should be experienced as the outside, is now veiled as something that, like, it's this misrecognition. It's through desire, fantasy, ideology, subject supposed to know, because the outside is not experienced in its entirety, but in a limited way. So it seems like it's a part of the social bond, or it's mediated by the social bond in such a way that there's no access to like actual outside. Everything, wherever outside is introduced, it's immediately reinscribed. And this reinscription is how neurosis manages the relationship with the other, the outside, and makes it stable. The outside becomes inside. What was not signifiable no longer appears as an external intrusion, the outside, but is recoded as an internal drive of desire. Again, that's the key. Like the outside, the enigmatic foreign presence is now something like conventional, normal, like what we do in everyday life. It's not something extraordinary, even though like we chase it, we dream about it, we fantasize about it, but it's not like the only thing that matters, the only thing, the only source of truth. and so on. Yeah, it's not anything like that. And that's why, as I already mentioned, everything that doesn't fit outside is reinscribed in the social bond. And that's why the other is irrevocably lost in neurosis, because it cannot be experienced without succumbing to symbolic mediation, name of the father. And maybe this is a side point, but I don't know. I don't even know if I should go into this any further or extensively. But even in late Lacan, when the focus is on knots and like relativization of the name of the father, there are names of the father. Know this like universal structural determination that was prior to it characterized of neurosis and that has to be accepted or reality is not managed. Now, like there are multiple structural operators, multiple ways to note your own reality. Now, like Lacan speaks of three registers, real, symbolic, and imaginary, and so on. So there's plurality of names of the father, plurality of potential ways. So this primacy of name of the father is like somewhat toned down, and like there's multiple attempts to note the three registers and to stabilize reality, but still it's interesting that this is toned down to some extent, but still the interface in neurosis is nevertheless much less generative than in psychosis, because, as we said in the first part of the session, that neurosis subjectivity is constituted by being born in a reality that is not yours. So even if you tone down or like renote this stabilizing function of how the other is managed, you are still like only now entering this alternative space of possibilities, like multiple ways of how like one can have functioning reality, how stabilization can take place. So you don't have any like real insight into the generativity of the interface, whereas in psychosis, precisely because the name of the father was rejected for closure, or even like in symptom, that where the paternal function isn't really operative, so it necessitates another stabilization. The psychotics are like born into generativity, so they have all of this advantage or like experience that the neurotics don't have. So even if we have neurotic symptoms, these are still much less generative than psychotic symptoms, because the reality is much less constrained in psychosis than neurosis. So this is maybe like a side point, but because otherwise people would potentially assume that that potentially my perspective is a little bit too deterministic. So maybe it's nice to put it in. Yeah, I just said this. Yeah, and now we can now I can just give you a couple of examples, because this is from a seminar by Alfie Baun, Capitalism and Psychosis, School of Materialist Research, and unfortunately I got ill, so I couldn't attend the seminars, but still I watched the recordings. And interestingly, the first definition of psychosis in 19th century is done by a cousin or a brother of Adolf Huxley, Darwinian biologist. And there he says that psychosis is a lack of reality testing, that psychosis is skipping of steps, whereas neurosis is not skipping steps, or actually like at least like knowing what the steps are and not like skipping them. And so Baum like extrapolated from this analogy that like that psychotic reality again is much less stable because it's much less defined and everything. But I could go into different directions in why this is not the case. Maybe just a quick note, because like if the other is not integrated, defined, then there's this constant pressure to know what the other is. So there has to be like constant like prediction, selection, different hypotheses that are confirmed or not. So precisely because there's generativity, there's much more testing going on. So in some sense, this is much closer to how science operates. Like science doesn't define what something is, but like tests, does experiments and so on. So immediately, like this could be an easy objection to make, but an even more interesting one is that neurotics are much less interested in reality precisely because, sorry for repeating this phrase, but because the reality has been lost much more extensively than in neurosis, because they abandoned their direct connection with the other, because they constrained their relationship with it, integrated it, and now like dialectically manage it and only enjoy it through this unsignifiable remainder. Because this is the case, they are much less interested in the reality because they experience it much less. Whereas psychotics are, as Reza Negrestani told me on the consultations that I had with him, are intensity junkies. So psychotics are in love with reality. Like reality is the only thing that interests psychotics precisely like because it's much less mediated, experience much more intensely. There's no prohibition, there's no limitation. So nothing's been taken. There's no loss. So the interest in reality is immensely greater. There's no comparison. So in a sense, yes, neurotics have their reality, their stabilizing interface, but this is not only a fiction, but how interest in reality gets lost. And we should talk more about it because this has like a lot of implications of how like people interface with one another, etc., etc. So I couldn't disagree more with what was proposed there. And that's why, for example, Lacan has this nice expression that psychotics have object A in their pocket. Again, like object A is there. It's not a product of the loss. It's there. Not like it's there. And that's why belief in reality is much greater. And this is seen like in delusions especially, but it's not limited or solely confined to delusions. And again, this is the case because name of the father limits this interaction for the sake of stability of the social bond. So interest in reality is to some extent lost. And name of the father, I mean, again, is simply this. You can't have this, but you can have this instead. No full enjoyment. You cannot structure reality fully on your own terms, even if this might be a possibility. but protection from the invasive and demanding other is there for you. We'll take care of that reality doesn't get too overwhelming. Yeah, and I already repeated this a lot, that the problem is in neurosis is that the subject can access the other only through the social bond. That's why the other is fundamentally lost, experienced only through bits and pieces. And even when this experience happens, it's not like the other, the outside, the enigmatic other, something external, but internally inscribed, veiled by fantasy, ideology, and so on. And not only that, but all of what I already said. And this is maybe the important point that maybe like brings us closer to a nice example, that this is why for neurotics, what matters is not truth, but social bond. The economy that distributes jouissance, hierarchies, bureaucracy, tutelage, credentials, because this is where the jouissance is routinized and make workable, the only way that they can access it, enjoy, and always in a roundabout way. So you see, like, a lot has been lost, and sociality is the necessary interface for accessing the other. And this is like a pop cultural example. Maybe like it's not the best example, but I can still share it with you. You're not doing something because you believe in it. You are not Victor in Frankenstein, who's trying to resurrect people from the dead, but because being a doctor is respectable, desirable, attractive. And then people, so you see, even if the ambition of becoming a doctor is maybe greater than in psychosis, the reason for it is much less intense. Like, you don't want to resurrect people from the dead. And that's, again, like what I already said to some extent. What you become has been written in advance, whereas for the psychotics, they are the ones who define themselves. Their jouissance is their unique inscription of who they are. So how they enjoy, this is how they stabilize their relationship with the other. But this is singular. It's not defined by the social bond, doesn't go through the social bond. And so the relationship with the other is also not limited because of it. But yeah, at the price of existence, as I already talked about quite a bit about this at the start. Yeah, maybe this is an interesting point, that name of the father determines a relationship that otherwise wouldn't function. It would be too intense, risk collapse, destitution. That's what Lacan meant when he said there's no sexual relationship. There's no signifier that relates man to a woman, young people to old, rich to poor, Marx proletariat. So there has to be this structural overdetermination that makes us feel, or that produces this fantasy that there's a connection, that there's actually a relationship. Yeah, there's a relationship even if there's no relationship. And this is the reason why there's ideology, fantasy, desire to mask the fact that there's no inscription, nothing that connects the two together in a neat way. Ideology, love, friendship, sublimation is how this fact gets managed. Yeah, and I already like touched upon this quite a bit, but maybe to reiterate it again, in psychosis, this stabilizing relationship with the other is found but not through the name of the father, but a symptom, a singular knot that holds social reality together. Because in foreclosure, you are not part of the social bond, and you have to find a manageable interface to be able to survive, not to go mad, gain a place and a name in reality, so that things become available to you. And this is also how you constrain the other. Enjoyment is localized. You enjoy, and not something is enjoying through you. This is like Lacanian point. Enjoying reality is a prerequisite for stabilization. It's how object A is extracted from you. Only in this way is the power of the other over you. Yeah, please. You raised it.
I'm sorry, maybe my question is quite silly, but does it mean that a psychotic doesn't really need name of father because he doesn't have to have it in order to determine how his relationships work? Because only neurotic needs the name of a father for it to determine the way that it interconnects things that have no way to be neatly connected. So psychotic doesn't need it, or am I mixing it up?
Yeah. Psychotics don't subscribe to the name of the father from the start. That's what being a psychotic means. That's what foreclosure is. So you are forced. Foreclosure is what means that you don't establish a relationship with reality through the name of the father, but on your own singular terms. And this is how castration gets introduced in psychosis, not through the name of the father, but through this singular inscription that is the symptom, this stabilizing interface for how the relationship with the other can be managed without without this mediating interface, without subscribing to any preconceived notions of how relationships should be, what's the right way to do something, what pathways are available, what not, but in a unique and singular way. Yeah. And this is just enjoying reality is a prerequisite for stabilization, because this is the only way the power of the other over us is limited. And this is Lacanian point. When you enjoy, you are limiting enjoyment. If this doesn't happen, reality can get overwhelming, intrusive, full of meaning that isn't signified. Or becomes delusional, complete certainty in messages from the other. And this is why within Lacanian psychoanalysis, this objection that Deleuze and Guattari lay upon Lacanian psychoanalysis, that the desire is constrained by lack, doesn't really hold, because symptom is precisely an example that even though lack is introduced, castration, the other is not limited, or it's not defined. So desire is not constrained in any way. So this is this is important maybe to differentiate the two perspectives. And this is, I think, a nice example of how neurotics operate, or how this neurotic subjectivity forces maybe society to control to control how it relates, because I will just read what I wrote, and because it's the clearest way I can say it. This is why neurotics try to control, manage, determine all relationships that aren't simply manageable. that one has to establish relationship with them one way or the other. And this establishing of the relationships, it is constrainment and dialectical integration. Like something new happens, okay, immediately, like we have to make it a part of the social bond, existing institutions, assign it proper names, institutional credentials, everything like that. Integration has to proceed immediately, and this is not like a conspiracy or something bad by itself, but is a product of the interface that they have subscribed to. Everything that isn't controllable has to be, that's the only relationship that they know of, and they have to impose it on everything else, set a limit. Because this is how relationship with the other, the outside, is managed in neurosis. This is only stabilization that they know of. Like this is what neurosis is as a structure of subjectivity. And we see this same principle with AI, capitalism, environmental problems. And we also see in how people deceive themselves, what stories they produce or how they argue for the necessity of certain things. Like maybe these are, again, not the best examples, but AGI is a Silicon Valley delusion. Potentially true, but structurally holds true for what I'm saying. There's no possibility of AGI. Like there's no possibility of AGI coming from the future. This is a fantasy. It's not how reality operates. Reality is managed. There's no this like godlike agency that can simply you know what I'm trying to say. Nick Land is a crackpot and not a real philosopher. This is again like it has to be the case. I mean, no serious person would think that what his philosophy is proposing could be true. There's nothing inhuman about capitalism, of course, and I mean, I think that you have a sense of what I'm trying to say here. Yeah, and this is how novelty gets lost, because it has to be reinscribed. Whenever something new happens, it has to be reinscribed. That's the only way that this thing can function. Reinscription all over again. And this is the paradox. Even if they want more reality, they're forced to lose it over and over again. Because novelty cannot simply remain novelty. It has to be like, it has to be toned down, like, you know what I'm saying? And this is why I like to say that Marxism is psychosis for neurotics. It's like how a neurotic would try to have everything. This is Marxism. Like, no, like class struggle through history and things like that. So this is like a perfect way for how neurotic would try to fight this problem. And this is why there cannot be no agreements about key problems, and this is the case also for Nick Land and, for example, his political trajectory, because psychotics try to break through this protective shield, name of the father, to unveil the real, the outside, whereas neurotics veil what's not integrated, outside, novelty, etc., And a lot of cultural battles can be like operate along this axis. And I mean, yeah, that's why I just for fun wrote that neurotics are Jedi and psychotics are obviously Sith, because like there can be no control of the Force. And neurotic reality is for this reason fiction that at the same time precludes reality from becoming one, from turning into fiction. And yeah, that's again the paradox, whereas psychotics want to turn reality into fiction. That's what dreaming the dream or desire to stay in the dream world is. And again, key differences between neurosis and psychosis: reality defined neurosis versus reality not defined psychosis. One participates in reality, and this like that's why satisfaction is much lesser, because like it's already delimited. It's like going to a supermarket and buying I don't know, ice cream. Like it's good, but it's not everything that you want. But one has to build it. Psychosis, like if you build your own reality, then this is what you want. You want to build your own reality. The latter is obviously more generative, with all the dangers that come with it. Too close to the real, no managing interface, power of the other over us, delusion, etc. But since the other is not defined, the interface is much more generative, and the potential of dreams, dreaming what's on the other side of the interface, is fully unleashed. The other remains enigmatic, it remains on the outside, it's not reinscribed, it's not dialectically managed, it's not lost and only consumed in bits and pieces, but it's still there, it still operates, there's still this direct connection through the interface. And that's why, like in this Psychotic Accelerationism text that I wrote for Chum Journal, I wrote that the psychotics prefer to stay in the dream world and to make it increasingly consistent. And yeah, that's it. And I think that this part of the story we can I guess leave, because now we are 2 hours and 13 minutes mark. So I think that I think that it's best if we have a discussion or talk about, I don't know, assignments for the seminar, how you want to do presentations or whatever you prefer. I mean, or if you prefer, I can finish in 10 minutes, I think, whatever you prefer. Or you think it's best. And sorry that I haven't been looking to the chat.
I think we are okay with finishing, I guess.
Okay, should we then discuss how we want to do presentations, or yes, Caleb.
Yeah, I was wondering if there will be like a explicit like syllabus or whatever added to the drive or whatnot, or yeah, if we're just going to determine that. And then also, would it be possible to upload these slides in the syllabus, or?
Yes, of course. I mean, the syllabus is there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
And
it was there. It was more just like regarding the assignments and like essay or presentation or whatnot.
yeah, if this we should add this so that people can write them down, or which literature they want to present for the class, or like to record themselves.
Okay, so it will be like it'll just be like a final project and then it'll be a presentation.
Yes, but presentations don't have to be done in the class. In class, so you can form groups and send, like, I don't know, a video to me, or even like maybe there's some flexibility. Maybe presentations can be even in written form, and you can also decide if you want to present a specific text that is in the syllabus, or if you want to, maybe present, yeah.
Cool,
And yeah,
sounds good. Thank you.
I can upload the PowerPoint slides to the drive. Yes,
Awesome. Thank you so much.
no problem.
Hey, Max. So I also prefer to submit the writing, not the presentation, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe because I think it's better if, I mean, because there are a lot of us here, and I just don't know how much time it would take us to have so many presentations in class. That's why, and maybe like video presentations, maybe it's hard to do in groups. I'm just thinking of the easiest option available so that everyone can have the easiest time.
So I think normally the format is something like 800 to 1200 words for the presentation, and then like 1500 to 2000 words for the final project. Does that sound like something that feels sufficient to you?
Yeah, of course.
And then for the presentation or reading summary, we should pick one of the reading summaries from, or pick one of the readings, or I suppose the video that was assigned for the opening, and use that as the basis for the summary. And then the essay itself can be a specific articulation based on our own perspective and interaction with the course's broader themes, in sort of medium format essay.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And you can also pick from the optional reading for the presentations.
Thank you for the clarification.
Hey, I'd like to ask if it's okay to use text from outside the syllabus, or we should limit it to what we have in the syllabus already.
I think that you can use also outside the syllabus. Maybe you can just write down a couple of sentences why you think it's related to the seminar or important.
Okay, thank you.
maybe I'll ask a question if we just have a few moments and there's nothing else to cover in terms of the kind of like bureaucratic or logistical concerns. One word that I kept kind of circling around as you were speaking, which I feel like was absent, unless I missed it, is this idea of scale, relative psychosis, and neurosis. And it does feel like scale and scale's requisite relationship with noise is like a requisite factor in this sense of kind of sense making, which is sort of operational across both registers. I was wondering if you might, this isn't a fully formed question, but I was wondering if you might have some sense of how you triangulate this idea of scale against this conversation, and if that's something you think about. I mean, scale obviously has a pretty cursory relationship with accelerationism because it's scale as speed or scale as kind of I don't know what the word for this would be, but like sort of runaway train. You know, it's about this kind of and I see that in the notes that Reza gave you, this kind of like overdose of reality. It feels very like sci-fi, you know, strapped to the chair with 1,000 televisions in front of you or something like that. Anyway, if maybe if you could give any insights that you've got, that's something that I'm thinking about relative to today's discussion.
I mean, yeah, no, it's a good question. I just because I don't want to imply that there's like actual limitation, like that neurosis is like actual limitation, or that like you cannot have an intense relationship with reality if you are neurotic. But maybe more what, for example, Nick Land writes in Teleoplexy, where he writes that one potential trajectory is a controlled explosion. So there's still an overabundance of production of networks, platforms, whatever. It's just a controlled explosion. And maybe even, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with psychoanalytic literature, but I was thinking about Slovenian philosopher Samo Tomšič and his book, or their book, about capitalism's unconscious, where capitalism is what produces this object A, and this is, in Marx theory, this is the surplus that's produced through the cycle of MC, M prime. And so this remainder becomes the key for the loop. So like novelty is for the first time like inscribed as like the key for this productive process. Like surplus value becomes the subjectivity of the modern age, let's say, how like the system operates. So this is maybe interesting for this question, but maybe this is all that I can say for now.
That's a great start. Thank you very much. I appreciate the answer.
Just to jump in on that, you also use the word reverse and reversal, and I wondered if you got that term sort of from somewhere.
Reversal, that this is like that these are like opposite structures that are negating one another. Is this the context of reversal that you are alluding to?
I was more interested in, like, you talk about like the Landian reverse of Lacanian psychoanalysis that was kind of like says psychosis is a valid no limit site of subjectivity that can be intensified, as rather than like, I don't know, like a bad thing. So kind of whenever I hear the word reverse in the context of accelerationism, I think of someone like Jean Baudrillard's like reversibility. So I didn't know if that was just something you had thought about when you were coming up with this. So yeah.
To be honest, not. It's just that this primacy. I was just thinking about it, perhaps like more simplistically, just that the primacy of what's, for example, first and second can potentially be reversed, and not only that, but if we make this reversal, then some like firmly established notions like, are we closer to reality? I mean, I know that reality, like as a physical thing out there, doesn't exist, but for the sake of the argument, like something that we interface it with it and is stable, like are we closer to reality in neurosis or psychosis? So like the like proposition of psychotic accelerationism is that we are closer perhaps to reality in psychosis than in neurosis, because like this connection with it hasn't been constrained, limited, predefined. So this is just like one reversal. So even if psychosis is traditionally understood as like antithesis to reality, that's why like if we speak about psychosis, like it's still like it's just a loss, nothing concrete, only destabilization, only this destruction of subjectivity. But if like you push this logic further enough, then reality starts to gain traction again, and this is accelerationist hypothesis that the reality suddenly becomes more rigorous because you have to be more aware of your generative interface. Nothing is given for free. In neurosis, like a lot is given for free. That's why you don't have to pay attention at every step. That's why I was critical of Alfie Baum and his example that psychotics are the one who are skipping steps. Just like a short comment. Yeah, please.
When I was reading the syllabus before the seminar, I was really, I think, mesmerized by the phrase in your essay. Enlightenment is a realization of how experience is implemented. And when we were talking about the psychotic and the neurotic way of relating to reality, you said that psychotic is closer to the reality because like the reality for a neurotic is a fiction, while psychotic has more connection to reality because they're ready for the intensity of it and they're willing to cope with how much it entails and how much it entails things that are tabooed. So I was wondering that you were saying that like psychotic is closer to reality, but is it better to be closer to reality? Because when I was reading the text and I was reading this phrase, enlightenment is a realization of how experience is implemented, I understood it in a way that psychotic has no differentiation between what is real and what is not real. And because we're not trying to constantly make these boundaries, make these walls, they're freer in a way. And this is what liberates them. The choice of rejecting the name of the Father and the choice of not being like not closing the doors of something that that has been tabooed in this reality. And when you were saying this lecture, it kind of sounded more like psychotics are closer to the reality, while not sounding like they're not differentiating between them. So I was wondering which of these interpretations is more right. Does that make sense?
No. I completely understand the question. That's why consistency is so important, because you have to have this, like a reality. If reality is too close, then you are not like you even if you are accelerating reality, if reality is not, even if you are accelerating reality, if reality is too close, then this will lead into like a collapse or delusion or things like that, because there's no negation that stabilizes this relationship. So a certain form of negation, a certain form of castration has to happen, and this is the symptom. How one manages this interaction, how willing one is to push this intensity while still being able to manage it, to constrain it, to not let it become too overwhelming, too encompassing, too all-signifying. This is the psychotic savoir. This is the thing that has to be learned, that one has to be careful of. Like, be mindful of all the rigorous tools, all the, let's say, scientific literature, all the stabilizing interfaces. So it's not that being closer to reality is by itself a privileged position. I definitely don't think that this is the case, because it's more it's just about how this stabilization takes place. If it necessitates like a like a this transcendent control operator, or if it can be immanently managed without this imposition from the outside, without this determination, without this constraint. It's just about, can we limit reality without defining it? Can we have this intensity without subscribing to the social bond, name of the father? And accelerationism is an attempt at that, and this is why the outside is such a privileged operator in Landian philosophy, because like outside it's just that, like that, there's nothing more to it. It's just like not constraining the interface, being able to have this yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi everyone. So I think my question is that, like, I was just wondering if we could have like reached this conclusion like without maybe like using the Freudian, like the Oedipus complex, because from my understanding it's that like Lacan built like on Freud's Oedipus complex. Like, even though I feel like it's not as literal, but I feel like it really does kind of like stabilize the theory, especially like when you talk about, I think in Ali Reza's, presentation, where he was talking about like the parents, like the mother and the father, like finding something that they can't like necessarily like find in the child, and then the child just kind of comes to that realization, and that's where the negation would come in. So I think for me, I was just kind of thinking in the literal sense, like in the context where like a child is raised by like a single parent, like how does that idea of like negation like translate in the same like in what sense would it differ from like the original example that is being used? And I think I was also kind of like curious about, you know, the whole idea of like what is this about the name of the father? I'm just curious, like if it's anything patriarchal, or again, if I'm like again like thinking in a maybe like too literal like form. Just please correct me. But yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Thank you.
No, thank you. These are great questions. I think that like Jacques-Alain Miller has this phrase that Lacan wrote the first anti-Oedipus. So this is like a provocative claim, and I wouldn't go that far, but what Lacan does to the Oedipus complex is that first he basically makes it all about language. It just like, that's why like it's a father function. It's not like Oedipus. It's not like you have to have this authoritative father that is like interjects into a relationship, but it's more like just a function of language, and it's just this metaphorical substitution. It's almost like a linguistic operator, nothing more, nothing less. So this this like this direct context within the nuclear patriarchal family is already quite like abstracted and like desubstantialized almost entirely by Lacan. And later on, when he speaks about knots, the paternal metaphor is just finding a hole so that reality is stabilized. It's just a knot, a functional relationship between the three registers of existence: imaginary, real, symbolic, that are separated and don't like collapse or stick on one another. Whole is just like a distance from the other, how some stability, some breathing space, some room for this relationship to take place. So basically, name of the father becomes just language that has to be noted. Basically, it's at the end, late Lacan, it's basically doesn't have any relationship to family or this traditional social relationships. You cannot social reality in so many different ways. There's no other of the other. No like signify, no universal signifier. All of this all of this has been overcome in the late 70s, I believe, or sometime then. So I think that a lot of this is overcome, has been overcome. But yeah, and the question about like I don't know. I mean, I'm not a psychoanalyst, so maybe it's better if I don't answer how exactly like a single parent like introduces a negation. But I guess it can be done in the same way. Yes, please.
Hi, thanks, Max, for first of all for what you said several times about being a bit repetitive. I think at least with tackling psychoanalytical concepts, it really helps when you go a bit like spiraling in a way. But I wanted to ask something that came up in the chat. When you say, for example, that psychotics could be maybe have more interest in reality or have more, even more connection to reality or more access to reality, intensity junkies, as Reza said. When you say reality, do you mean the Lacanian real?
No, because like if it's just real, it's just what like it's too intense. Like it overcomes any kind of position. No one can endure the real. Like there has to be some mediation. So it's again not about direct access, but just like it's more like you remember the interface. So like the interface is less constrained, so you feel like each interaction, like whenever, like each system, like each problem, you feel it more intensely, and then your solution to the problem, it has this intensity in it, because like you experience the intensity of something to a greater extent than what someone else experiences it, if like the relationship with that thing is much more mediated and much more specified, determined. So that's why like in landscapes, capitalism is such a great example, because it's clearly like the best example for this intensification, because you can't come with a concept like techno-capital, but especially not techno-capital from the future, if your interface with reality is constrained, because like you are too stuck into a specific determination to even think about how this version of the other could come from the future and fundamentally reconfigure how this relationship takes place. So it's just intensity of how reality is managed, how things are perceived, how much leakage there is, how much porous the interface is, you see, like how much intensity are you willing to let in? And this intensity is what produces dreams. This is why you can envision what's on the other side. You don't know, but you can envision. And that's why you envision techno-capital. And that's why then you define techno-capital, but it's not enough. Too much intensity is leaking through. And then you have, okay, it's techno-capital from the future. You see, it's just more intensity is being let in, and this intensity is not mediated. It's so you have to note it at the level of the real. Yeah. There's no loss in this note. These are not. It's not at the level of signifier, but at the level of letter. If we want to introduce another concept that might turn to a disaster, but you see what I'm getting. It's just the interface, it's much less constraining, and that's why everything is felt more intensely, and that's why this intensity can be so over the top and lead to destabilization, because it's too intense. It's not signifiable. There's no hole. It's too close. You cannot make sense. What it's like. It's too overwhelming to control it in any meaningful sense, and then you can spiral into a delusion, and then you can think that it's everything and la 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 la. You see the story. I mean, hopefully, at least partially explains the dynamic.
Thanks. As if there's no alienation in a way, or separation, or at least less.
Separation has to occur. That's necessity. Like it cannot be too close. Like the whole has to be produced. That's a necessity, but it's less alienating simply because you are not using signifiers that have been already given to you. You are not just like entering the social field and then saying, aha, it's it's Keynesian capitalism. You see, like it's neoliberalism. Okay, yeah, it's neoliberalism. It's good, but maybe it's not good enough. You are not. You go beyond the existing, let's say, yeah. That's why it's less alienation, and also because the interface it's not defined. That's why it's maybe we can talk more about that in because I have this part of psychosis. It's hard to maybe say it everything so quickly. Yeah, please.
Hi, Max. I'm Pradeep. My question was with regards to psychotics. You mentioned how psychotics or psychosis results, or one of their key functions is them resisting the name of the father or the master signifier, or could it? I don't know if it's the master signifier in that sense, but um, I wanted to ask firstly, is it that they resist? It's more of a question of agency, or the fact that they can't help but resist, or it gets slipped away from them. The second aspect of this question is that even relevant in this case? The question of their agency, whether they either resist it as they have some sort of choice, or is it like a capacity issue that they can't help but resist it? And what does that, if that is even relevant, what does that difference sort of mean?
No, great question. If you would ask Lacanian psychoanalysis, the latter would be the case. So they wouldn't be able but to resist because like the loss is too traumatic, so that's why they resist the name of the father. It's not like a choice, a subjective decision. That's the classical reading. I just wanted to add something in this segment. And that's why foreclosure is a term that comes from law, and it's not rejection. Although I still like this is like I like to say rejection because I have this bias that it's more like a subjective decision, more like a choice, whereas classically, even I think Fimiami, even if he speaks about psychotic savoir, it's still not a choice, but it's more like because the trauma is too immense, the loss cannot be justified. That's why the foreclosure happens. That's why foreclosure for Fimiamni and for Lacanian psychoanalyst, it's not like a rejection. And because rejection implies can imply also that like castration already took place and then it was rejected. This is definitely not the case. But also it's not rejected simply that it's like a conscious choice or a subjective decision, but I'm not fully decided on this yet if maybe for Psychotic Accelerationism project is at least partially a conscious decision, or maybe it can be a conscious decision maybe in certain context, in a specific, let's say a certain context. So that's how it is.
And what would, sorry, just to follow up on that, because I was wondering about this. Let's say in this particular project, it is more like a subjective decision partially. What would that difference from the incapacity to nevertheless reject it anyhow versus there being like a certain agency in the very rejection that happens?
Yeah, because if rejection is just trauma, then it's no coincidence that the other is too overwhelming, that there's no stability, that like psychosis is being at the mercy of the other, that other is invasive, that's like loss of reality is almost baked in the cake. It's like almost a default, like it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like a traumatic experience to castration. It's simply that. Whereas if there's at least a bit of subjective decision, then it's more like what I said during the talk, that the psychotic knows that another relationship with the other is possible. They've experienced it, maybe made it functional to some extent, but they have to relinquish it because of this imposition of the name of the father, because the name of the father thinks, no, this cannot be the case, this cannot produce stabilization, so you are forced to abandon what has already for you produced stabilization. That would be my argument. And this is why I like to at least partially insist that psychotic savoir is being kind of aware of this alternative possibility as having this stabilization without like the need to relinquish something, or that to experience the same loss that neurotics experience and so on.
Thank you. That makes sense.